All right, good morning, everybody. It's good to have you on board here this morning. Today, for our webinar, we're going to be talking about project quality and the ability to assure control in the outcome. And so as we go through this, I've loaded this up real heavy because quality sometimes is one of the weaker areas for project teams, and especially the ability to audit it and to control it. And so this is going to be a very heavy one today that we're going to be walking through. So let's look at the first piece of this. As we talk about project quality for any type of project that we're trying to work on, several things play together on project quality. Notice in the process that we're going to give you here, it starts off with defining what the processes are, indicators that have been chosen, the data is collected on those indicators so that we know how we're doing in the areas of quality. Decisions are made based on that data, and so that's part of that analysis piece. And then display the results, and then look at how to improve, because we're trying to get better and better. And that how to improve is really part of continuous improvement. And then that's going to influence new processes, which are going to influence new culture, and which are going to influence the best practices created. And of course, this is what should be happening in our projects continuously. The reason why you're doing lessons learned is so that it influences future projects and future processes. So many times people are not doing lessons learned, or if they're doing it, they have a tendency not to let it influence anything. Now, before I go much further here, can you hear me? Give me a yes. And can you see the screen okay? Those are the two important pieces for this. So can you hear me okay? Can you see the screen? Okay, good. Thank you, Stephanie. All right, anybody else? Everybody else okay? Everybody can see everything? Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. That's what I wanted to make sure of. All right. Now let's look at the old philosophy of quality. The old philosophy is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And we've all heard this old saying. However, when we start looking at it from this aspect, this puts us into to a situation where we're constantly putting out fires. We're constantly running from crisis to crisis. And I know sometimes many of you guys in real world, we do that. We do have crisis in a project. However, we're not wanting to set ourselves up for crisis with this mindset. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The mindset of that could actually cause us to be to produce worse quality in the future. For an example, what would happen if an airlines had the idea of it ain't broke, don't fix it? Then you'd have engines falling off, you would have engines not working, you'd have planes having tons of emergency landings, because they have certain metrics in place that once an engine has so many hours, they pull it out of service and they rebuild it. They don't wait for it to go out. Also, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, it commits us to that life of continual firefighting, reacting to the continual unscheduled breakdowns or problems which only occur at critical times. And all of us hate this. And all of us have been in crisis on projects. And it's not like what I'm saying to you today is going to stop all crisis. We know that's not the case. But what you're not wanting to do is to get into those crises because of a lack of planning and because of a lack of setting the project up correctly. All right, let's compare two things. One is going to be traditional and quality focus. On a traditional focus, the old mindset about some of this was you fix something when it breaks. Everything was maintained pretty much manually, and there was almost no analysis about what was happening. All of that is old school. And so what we're looking at today in project management specifically is that quality focus is very proactive. We're looking ahead. As a project manager, you probably have noticed is that you're trying to outthink the project, you're trying to outthink the problems. And so you're wanting to be proactive, you're wanting to take preventative measures to prevent breaks or mishaps or bottlenecks or any of those kind of problems. Obviously, you're documenting everything using technology so that in case there's a change order, things can be changed in seconds rather than hours for manually doing any of these things. And then analysis and tracking measures are instituted because you're looking to see where are things falling apart, where are things breaking. So in quality management, a goal of project management is to meet the requirements of the stakeholder of the project. It's managing the quality of the project and will allow this to happen. And so what you're trying to do is provide the level of quality. So let me do it like this. There is a scope of quality. Now, none of the books call it a scope of quality, but we're going to do that for the purpose of this presentation. There is a scope of quality or a level of quality that we have to provide that customer to fulfill that project. If I provide more than that level of quality, then I'm adding expense and time and different things like this. But what we're wanting to be able to do is that provide just the right amount of quality so that we can deliver the product or the service or the features to that customer in this project at the right time and to meet those. It's important to control the aspects of the project. And of course, it brings us back to that discussion of triple constraints. Now, if you're using PMBOK 6, you know PMBOK 5 and beyond doesn't talk about triple constraints. It just talks about constraints, and there's 7 of those listed. But that triple constraint is in almost every other textbook that when we're teaching or studying project management. And these are the 3 that seem to come back to us almost every time because we have baselines associated with these. So it's going to be cost, schedule, and scope. And those are our 3 baselines that we track the most in our projects anyway. And these are our baselines. So that's the reason why these seem to have a little bit more of an emphasis than anything else. Now, quality management controls the scope side of the triangle. It also provides guidance for meeting the other 2 constraints of cost and of schedule. Now, as we look at quality, there's 5 key checkpoints for quality management. One of those is going to involve management of upstream systems, which are going to be coming into our company or into our organization. How do we handle that type of quality? Incoming quality assurance, so that's going to be quality assurance from inside. In-process quality management, this would be non-value added. This is stuff that we're doing that a lot of times doesn't add value to the project or the process. And sometimes in-process quality management could be waiting time. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more later. And then outgoing quality assurance. How do you know that the project you're producing and handing to that customer is quality? And then proactive assurance of customer satisfaction. How do we know that, and how are we verifying that what we're providing to the customer is what they want? Unless we're able to hit all of these pieces here, it's going to be very disturbing to the customer because there's going to be something that they don't like. There's going to be something that's not meeting the level of quality that they want. Now, in project management, project quality includes processes for incorporating the organization's quality policy regarding planning, managing, controlling project and product quality requirements in order to meet stakeholder objectives. Now, the emphasis that we would make on this is in running a project, I don't have to create my own quality program. Look and see what kind of quality program does your company presently have. So let me give you an example of this. So let's say, for an example, your organization is a 6 Sigma type of organization. If it's a 6 Sigma type of organization, then use 6 Sigma type of processes with your project. Bring those in and use those type of metrics. Management already knows what those metrics are. Your teams have already been exposed to those metrics. People are used to looking at these type of metrics. So use those. Now, you might not be able to use all of those. That's okay. But use those that's going to make sense to project management. If you're a lean organization and you're running metrics with lean, then bring those pieces in and use those type of things that's going to benefit your project. The point I'm getting at is to come up with some elaborate quality system with metrics and things that's way beyond what anybody has in the company and nobody understands it might work against you. Now, there's times for that, obviously. There are times where you need very, very customizable type of metrics. But in this particular case, what you're looking at is use the metrics that are within the company, at least consider it first. Project management must address 2 sides to this, the management of the project and then the product of the project. And so when we talk about that product of the project, that's where quality fits in the most, because what you're looking at with the product of the project is this thing performing the way it's supposed to, especially if you're talking about software? Is it doing what the customer thought it was going to do? And so if it's not, then they're going to look at it as low quality. All right, so let's look at 3 different processes for project quality management: plan quality management, managing quality, and controlling quality. Now, in project quality management and plan quality management, you're identifying quality requirements and standards for the project deliverables and documenting how the project will demonstrate compliance with quality requirements. Now, when we talk about planning quality management, this is really the plan of how we're going to collect the data, manage the quality from start to finish on this project, and how we're going to create the quality management plan. Then you're looking at managing quality, and this is translating the quality management plan into executable quality activities that incorporate the organization's quality policies into the project. So this is how we're managing quality from beginning to end of that project. And then last is going to be control quality. This is the monitoring or the performance piece, and it records results of executing the quality activities to assess performance and recommend necessary changes. And so it's going to be in control quality, where you measure the performance, and in analyzing it, you determine what is the course of action to try to get the quality up to where it needs to be if we're having too many bugs or too many tests that are failing and those type of things. Now, in plan quality management, like I said, this is the plan that that's going to create your quality management plan. And then of course your plan is going to be called a quality management plan. So this is a process of identifying quality requirements and our standards for the project, its deliverables, and documenting how the project will demonstrate compliance with quality requirements or standards. This is an important piece because this is where all the discussions happen, where you and the team decide how you're going to measure the different types of metrics, and where you're going to get these metrics, how you're going to measure the metrics, how you're going to do the analysis on the metrics. And so this is a very important piece in trying to determine with a project. You want to get away from just looking at cost or just looking at time. That's a no-brainer. Management does that. But there can be projects that are on time and on budget, but they're terrible projects because they're not quality. But they were on time and they were on budget, and you guys know in the real world, you've seen that yourself. So what you're trying to do is, what other quality metrics are we going to measure this by? All right, so let's look at one of the constraints that we talked about, which is the scope baseline. Now we know that in PMBOK, scope drives the project. And so scope is the driving force, where in your world, the budget might be the driver of the project, but scope is driving it in PMBOK. So the scope baseline, which includes the WBS along with the deliverables documented in the project scope statement, are considered while determining which quality standards are suitable for the project and which deliverables and processes will be subjected to quality review. So then as we start looking at the scope baseline, how are we going to be able to get the quality up to a level to where the scope that the customer wants is the scope that we produce? Also, how can we maintain that level of quality from beginning to end of the project? And those are some of the discussions. What do we need to measure? What do we need to check on in order to do this? Now, there are documents that come into play. One of those is the assumption log. And this is a list of all the assumptions and constraints. And this is huge, especially in quality, because what you're trying to do is make sure that what the customer wants, you provide, but at the same time, you're wanting to make sure that what the customer assumes, that those assumptions are correct and based on something. You also would have requirements documentation, which captures the requirements that the project and product should obtain to meet stakeholder expectations. Now, these requirement documents once again, this goes along and connects with the scope. What is it that this project has to have? You're not wanting to provide a bunch of extra stuff that's not part of the scope or of the requirements. It's going to be very important for it to be part of that. Many times when you look at quality, quality probably connects the best to standards and regulations and almost anything else. Now, when we talk about the standard, it's a rule, guideline, or characteristic which is not mandatory. A regulation is a rule, guideline, or characteristic which is mandatory. Now, in your world, this might be totally different. A standard might absolutely be mandatory, but this is the PMBOK, this is more the PMBOK definition here, and this is a way of deciphering between the two. A standard is a characteristic that's not mandatory, but a regulation is. However, there are many organizations that have standards, and those standards are absolutely mandatory in that setting. You also get caught into this issue of data analysis. And so let's look at some of the data analysis that we would look at. Well, the first is going to be the cost-benefit analysis. Now, a lot of times people will say, well, wait a second, we did this all the way up in the business case, didn't we? And that's correct. You do your initial cost-benefit analysis in the business case. And of course, it's an input into your charter. And of course, from the charter, a charter is an input into all of your plans when you get into planning. And that's what you're doing here. So in a cost-benefit analysis, you're looking to see what the cost is or what the price is to get this work done compared to the benefit that it brings to you. And the way that it connects to quality is if you're trying to build a Cadillac, but you really only have budgeted a Volkswagen, you're going to have problems with these two. So it's financial analysis tool used to estimate the strength and the weakness of alternatives to determine the best alternative in terms of benefits provided. It helps the project manager determine if the planned quality activities are cost effective and the primary benefits of meeting quality requirements, less rework, higher productivity, lower cost, increased stakeholder satisfaction, and increased profitability. An analysis of each quality activity compares to the cost of the quality step to the expected benefit. Now let's let the smoke clear from all of that narrative and explain it like this. What you're really looking at is, okay, if I bump up all the quality to this level, what's it going to cost me in money? What's it going to cost me in time? And is it going to be worth it? That's really what you're asking yourself. And so we want high quality. We all talk about high quality, but what's it going to cost to do this? And so you have to look at what the ripple effect is, not just for the project, but for maintenance and for other things after the project is over with. We've bumped it up to another level. And so is it going to be worth it? Or is this just one of those nice things that we all talk about and we all agree with? But the problem is that it's not really cost effective to be able to do that. Now, here's some information that we might analyze to be able to determine how the project is going. First off, failure patterns, which could include test results, it could include bugs, all these different things. Frequency of occurrence, location of occurrence, types of failure, are the causes of failure known, corrective action to resolve the failures, do we see any trends? Now, as we look at information to be analyzed from these type of angles, what we're really looking at here in each of these pieces is you're looking to see, do you pick up any kind of pattern from these type of failures? So let's say, for an example, as you start looking at all these all these different types of information, you start picking up that at one location there's more failures than anything else. Well, that could be a training issue, it could be a supervisory issue, it could be a lot of other things. Or let's say there's more test results that are failing from one than another. And so the point is that it's to give you some of that data so that you can then turn around and come up with a strategy to be able to reduce that from happening and stop obviously that type of quality or bad quality from going out. Now let's give you some rules for implementing continuous quality. Now continuous quality has its roots all the way back into the 50s. And so George Robinson in 1991, this was a text that I taught continuous quality or continuous process improvement for the university. And so he has foundations that are there, and these foundations play a big role even in project management today. And you will see a lot of your current project management people who write about quality, they go back to the Demings, the Durans, and many of the historical quality positions. So be open, don't be afraid to share an idea, be supportive, non-critical, be positive, be willing to share your thoughts and your feelings. No finger pointing, that really focuses on the blaming component. KISS, keep it simple, stupid. That's what KISS has always stood for. And then have some fun. Now, one of the reasons why I wanted to show you this is because this goes all the way back to 1991, and he was looked at as cutting edge at that time, but this is absolutely what we need today. And our millennials that are working on our projects absolutely live by this thing. They want to be able to share their ideas. They're going to be supportive. Most of the time, your millennials are the most educated group of generation we've ever had. Most of them are very positive and innovative and creative. They're willing to try something new. They don't like the finger pointing. The finger pointing is from previous generations, and all of us who lived through those generations know that finger pointing really didn't accomplish anything. If anything, it caused people to want to hide any kind of deficiency. And in many cases, people don't have fun. And if you don't have fun today, you're going to have higher turnover. So these rules that we see all the way back in the continuous improvement text by Robson is exactly what we are needing today in our teams to be able to produce high quality. Now, there's some specific actions to improve project quality. Identify what we measured, will be measured, set baselines and benchmarks to compare measurements, create a plan to gather measurements, collect the desired measurements, analyze the data and compare it to the baseline, and then create action plans to make corrections. Now, if you look at these steps, this step is nothing more than a process. What's going to be measured? That's a huge piece. Now, let me give you an example. Excuse me. So you're talking to your customer and your customer says, well, I want what we're doing to be faster, more efficient, better than it's ever been. All of those sound good, and to a customer that might make sense, makes no sense to a project manager or to a business analyst interviewing that customer. Because better than it's ever been, faster than what? And that's where you're getting into those metrics. So identify what's going to be measured. How is the customer measuring success compared to how the project team's measuring success? Set the baselines and benchmarks to compare the measurements to. If you don't benchmark your project, it's going to be very difficult for you to compare speed or your schedule on timing, on your cost, and those type of things. So you want your baseline to be there so that you've got something to measure it to. Your baseline is basically just a stake in the ground saying this is what we think the plan is going to be, schedule-wise, cost-wise, scope-wise. That's why you have 3 baselines there, and that's why at the beginning of execution you're going to baseline that. And then collect the desired measurements. What kind of data do I need? And this is where it falls apart 9 times out of 10. I'm not trying to be critical, I'm just trying to keep it real. And so look in your organization and see if this is not a weak area. We can talk all the data in the world and we can talk all the metrics in the world, but how are we going to collect the data? And then the next piece is analyzing that data. Who's going to take the time to analyze it and look at it and make a judgment call? Because that's going to be huge. And then you create the action plan to make the correction. So you're looking at the data saying, okay, here's where we need to go based on the data. Right now, as we deal with this virus, this is one of the challenges that you're getting into is who's analyzing the data, what data is being collected, and then what are the correct action steps for the interpretation of that data. And you see right now, even on television, how people are looking at data differently. Some are looking at the data and ready to launch right back out into the public. Others are looking at the data and saying we need to stay home. And this is some of the stuff that you'll have a little bit of problems with, even with your project. People are going to look at the data maybe a little different than you. Now let's talk about some quantitative measurements. Could be an increase in productivity, a reduction in tardiness, absenteeism, turnover, cost savings, quality, requests for new teams or projects, a cost of rework, customer complaints. Now, when we talk about quantitative measurements are normally going to be much more numerical. It's going to be number oriented. They're going to be easier to count. Now, qualitative, you're going to notice in a moment, are more subjective. So quantitative, you're looking for a way, how can we count this? How can we measure this? Now, before I get off of here, I want to show you a couple of books. And so I don't have those listed, but I'm going to show them to you on video so that you'll be able to get this. Because these texts, I've got them here. These are the best I've seen on being able to come up with metrics for quality. So I'll show you that in just a moment. Now, quantitative measurements go on to be, it could be a number of work accidents, length of time to solve a problem, return on investment, employee grievances. You're looking at number of those, time to run a project through a phase, time for testing, time for approval process, time for setting up a team, time for gaining funding. Notice how all of these are pretty much connected to time or numbers. It's numerical, and that's why we go with quantitative, because it allows us to be able to count it. Now let's look at qualitative. Qualitative you can measure, but qualitative is always going to require usually an extra step. For example, morale, motivation. In order for me to know what your morale is and what your motivation is, I have to come up with some kind of survey or some kind of test for you to be able to give me feedback on what your morale is or what your motivation is. So that what we do is a lot of times we will fill out what's like a scale of 1 to 5. And so 5 means we are very motivated and 1 means we just hate everything. And so what happens is we fill these surveys out, and so we collect the surveys, then we have to count the surveys. How many 5s did I get? How many 1s did I get? How many 3s did I get? And so that allows me to get that numerical piece. This is the challenge doctoral students have all the time between qualitative and quantitative. Quantitative, it's based on money, it's based on numbers, it's based on something that's really easier to come up and count. Qualitative, much more subjective. So morale, motivation, attitude, excitement, support, interpersonal relationships, recognition, training and skills, communication, customer relationship. All of these are very important to measure. All of these are very important for quality. But the problem we get into is that people are having to make a judgment call. other word, you know, of whether or not, how do I think I got good communication from my project manager? Yes, I do. And somebody else says, man, it was horrible communication. So it's very subjective sometimes. Now, let me show you those books right now while I'm thinking about it. So I'm going to pause for just a second. I'm sorry. I had not planned to show you this, but I thought about it while I was there. I do this in the live seminars when we do this. So I've got a stack of books real quick here. So let me go through them real quick and you'll get a copy of the video at the end. This book is called The ABCs of Evaluation. And this is actually by John, Boulmetis, and then Phyllis, Dutwin. So I'll put it up here on the video like this. This is a great book talking about how to evaluate quality, how to be able to audit anything, not just for quality, but your projects and how to be able to tell whether or not how well something's going. Great book. Most of the books that you'll find are not very good. This is not, these are excellent books here for you. All right, let me give you a second one here. This is one of the best books that's out on metrics. This is a book called Metrics for Project Management. This is put out by Management Concepts. The author is Rad and Levin, R-A-D, Rad and Levin. This is one of the best books because he gives you samples of numerical ways to be able to come up with that numerical number rather than just being money and time. The other one that I wanted you to see is, this is by Kerzner. If you're not familiar with Harold Kerzner, he's one of the big gurus in project management. And Kerzner has written a book called Project Management Metrics, KPIs, and Dashboards. Kerzner is K-E-R-Z-N-E-R, Kerzner. He is a big guru. A lot of his textbooks are used in our doctoral programs, master's programs, two schools I teach for. One for master's, one's for doctorate. They use textbooks from him. This is a phenomenal book. The reason why I'm showing you these books is because these handful of resources will make a huge difference in your mindset and also in what you're going to measure in that project. Because what's going to happen is that when you're sitting in a project team and you hear the customer, you're going to then turn around and start asking the customer, how are they measuring this, or how might you measure something? Because some things are easy, some things are not as easy. Okay, now let's go a little further. Phrases which kill quality involvement. Now, this goes all the way back to '83, but these phrases are still there. And see if you've heard any of these. It's been done this way for years. That's John's job, not mine. We don't do it that way in our plant. It's been tried before. Our business is different. Let someone else try it first, and then we'll try it. Usually the remainder of that sentence. We don't have time for details. It's not practical, or we'll come back to it later. Now, you know, this was actually documented in '83 because this was the secondary text for quality that was used. But these same statements are used in teams over and over again. You maybe heard that just last week sitting in a team. All right. So let's go beyond that. Let's talk about other parts of analysis that we might use, and that would be a flow chart. In quality, sometimes changing the process will adjust how you're going to be able to speed something up, which obviously is a performance issue in the project. So one of the things that you might use is called a cause and effect diagram. This is sometimes called the fishbone diagram or the Ishikawa chart. It's called all of those. But it shows how various factors might be linked to potential problems or effects. Also, a system or process flow chart shows how various elements of a system interrelate to each other. Now, where you see the system or the process flow chart, you're looking for dead time. You're looking for waiting time. Now, here's how this would fit in the real world. Those of you who work on software projects, a lot of times the customer wants you to automate something, but what they're wanting is this process automated so their people don't have to do it, which is fine. But the problem with that is that many times that process is an old process that has been tacked onto for year after year. And so you've got 15 signatures in this process. And so really the process doesn't need 15 signatures when you automate it, and it doesn't have to be looked at by 4 other people. It ought to be able to be signed off on by maybe one person, and get rid of 15 signatures and be able to speed this thing up. But that's not necessarily the mindset of the customer. The customer's thinking automating it, but they're not thinking about cutting some of these things out. And sometimes that's the battle that you get into a little bit. The other side of this is the cost of quality. Going back to that cost benefit analysis, it should be done on the proposed methods of implementing quality. What's the economics of the quality, such as the cost of defects, cost of inspection, the total cost? So in trying to inspect to make sure that we keep this level of quality, what's that ongoing cost going to be long-term? And can we justify that long-term cost? In some cases we can, and some you can't. Now, something that goes all the way back to Dr. Deming from back in the early 60s, and if you're not familiar with Edward Deming, Deming was one of the big pushes for quality when America really was not focused on quality. And Deming made a comment, and he said 85% of the cost of quality is the direct responsibility of management. And what he was talking about is because management in that day and time had such control over everything. Today we have more freedom, more flexibility to be able to do others. But some of this is still practical. And the reason is because management sometimes is scared to let go and let the team be able to make decisions. But once again, your millennials are wanting to make decisions and wanting to be able to give input. Now, here's some other considerations under cost. Cost of prevention, additional planning, educational or training of project team and stakeholders, inspection, testing of the internal, external deliverables of the project, improved designs for quality projects. So cost of prevention. So you're looking at, in some cases, some of the projects you're working on might be the cost of prevention because your software is still working right now, but your software is not going to be updated by the makers of the software anymore. So you're having to change everything out. Many of the states across the country did this with Windows 7. They were running XP or something else, and all of a sudden it wasn't going to be updated, so they had to update. And so they were trying to prevent future problems from happening by updating that software. Cost of prevention too can include quality staff, quality audits, quality plan and execution. So I'm looking at also making sure I've got a certain level of staff that's going to be analyzing this data. I want an experienced staff person for that position. Whoever's doing an audit, I want an experienced, detailed person. I don't want somebody who's going to talk in generalities. The cost of defects. Defects can come in a lot of different ways, but scrap, rework, repair, replacement of defect parts and inventory, repair after the delivery of the product. Cost of defects can have a powerful impact on the total cost. With our PMP bootcamp, we do a guarantee. Well, we track how many times a person is going to take, you can only take it 3 times. And so we track how many people have taken it 2 times and 3 times, how many people have failed all 3 times, and we're going to bring them back the next year to take it again on our dime. And so we track all of that because that's going to be rework in the training industry. Also, loss of future business with a stakeholder. For an example, you've done such a cruddy job because of bad things that the stakeholder or the customer doesn't want us back. Any legal issues for non-conformance, that's going to have a problem. Liability for defects, was anybody hurt? Risk to life or property. A lot of things can play into it depending on what the project is or what the product is. Okay, so here's some general types of costs that seem to come up in quality. Cost of prevention, cost of appraisal, cost of internal failure, cost of external failure, cost of exceeding requirements, cost of lost opportunity. Now, when we talk about internal failure, we always want internal failure rather than external. And the reason is because internal failure, we've got it in-house. We're working on it. External failure, it's in front of the customer at that point. So we always want internal failure compared to external. So let's look at them very quickly here. Cost of prevention, the cost of upfront activities to prevent failure from happening. The cost of curing a problem once it happens is generally higher than the cost of preventing the problem in the first place. So what we're looking at is how to do it right the first time. If we do a crummy job on that, then we're going to find ourselves right back having to do it again. Now, once again, the virus that we're dealing with right now, That's what we're having to look at. If we don't look at this thing correctly, will we be back here in, in 12 weeks and having to do something similar? So you're trying to do it right the first time. Secondly, cost of defects usually is more than the cost of prevention. Defects may be found until the project is turned over to maintenance or support function groups. So especially in software, you look at defects, but you could look at defects in a lot of other things. If we're building a product, we could have defects when we start looking at testing where it does not perform at the level or the capacity the customer wants. Let's look at prevention compared to detection. Under prevention, prevention is usually much cheaper. It's very active, and it's an attitude. We're trying to prevent those problems from happening. So let me use the PMP example again. In our boot camps, when we do the PMP, the prevention piece is, I want to make sure I have a qualified instructor. I want to make sure our material is right. I want to make sure that we're telling them everything we possibly can. I want to make sure that we're supporting it with tests. So that's prevention. I'm trying to do it on the front end. On the back end, detection or cure, detection's expensive and it's too late. I don't want to provide all those things after the person has already failed the first time. Even though sometimes you find yourself having to go back over those things, you want to do your best to try to do it on the front end, not on the back end. And that's really what's happening with this piece here. What about the cost of appraisal? The cost incurred to determine conformance with quality standards. Inspections, auditing is the most common examples. And so how often are you going to audit something? And what's the benefit of auditing at certain intervals? And it's very important. And auditing is not just the financial piece. We're talking about cost here of appraisal, but we're talking about you're auditing the quality, you're auditing the performance and the standards. The cost of internal failure. Cost of correcting product or services that do not meet quality standards prior to delivery to a customer, such as engineering, design changes, or invoice errors. Any of these kind of things that we can fix and catch internal is always going to be better. Why? You don't have a customer that's upset. Look at it when it goes on the other side. External failure. The cost incurred to correct products or services after delivery to the customer. How many times do you find yourself having to fix something or ask for a correction or send something back in because something's wrong? I mean, you find yourself in a lot of times, and it's very frustrating because it sucks down our time and nobody even looks at that particular piece. And this is the ultimate piece that would hurt anybody who's in business today. The cost of lost opportunity. Lost revenues can result from customers choosing competitive product or services from cancellations when products and services do not meet the customer requirements. Many organizations will argue that lost opportunity is impossible to measure. However, most sales representatives are usually able to gauge the reason they lost to a competitor. Okay, let me give you just a great example of this. Lost opportunity it means that I don't get future business because we did something wrong in the past. So this is not a political statement, but just recently you saw for the Democratic primary, they used an app. One of the states used an app. And so as they got ready to use the app, it was made by a company called Shadow. And so if you saw it on news, like I did, I'm sitting there. And so the app did not work. And so they had to go back and actually physically count all of the votes for their primary. Okay. That's not the problem. The problem was that it didn't work, but also it didn't work publicly because the news media kept naming this company, Shadow. And then other states who actually had contracted with that company for that app for their primaries dropped it. They didn't try it. And the reason was because the failure was so bad over here, and I believe it was Iowa where the failure was so bad that Nevada dropped it. Now, that's a good example of the cost of lost opportunity. Now, they could have fixed the app. It could be the best app in the world right now. But having your name named on television over and over again, I just shook my head thinking, oh my gosh, those guys are dying because they've been named over and over again. Project auditing. Auditing will examine overall efficiencies. It will also quality, value of outcomes resulting from use or non-use of a process, practice, policy, or capability. Auditing activities will identify the efficiencies and qualities and values associated with the projects and the product. Auditing will also examine business and technical aspects of the project. Now, you don't have to audit everything. You could just be auditing the certain quality standards, or you could just be auditing the certain tests. So you're deciding what you're going to audit. You don't have to audit everything every time. So here's a process for monitoring and evaluation of oversight. So let me get my glasses on where I can read this, okay? All right, so you'll notice here the first bullet point at the top, you establish monitoring and evaluation process. What's our process that we're going to use to go through here and monitor and evaluate the project, especially the quality of the project? Secondly, what standards are we going to measure this against, or what kind of regulations? In other words, what's that metric? Then contacting the team, making sure the team is on board with this and understand what we're measuring. Then conducting the audit. The audit will involve 3 different pieces. One could be documents, it could be surveys, could be interviews. And so it doesn't matter, and it might just be one of those. You might decide, you know what, it's only going to be surveys. That's okay. You decide. And then that feeds into that audit, and then analyzing the data. Who's analyzing the data to be able to give feedback on what's happening with the data? And so that's more than just raw numbers. And then that analysis is going to lead to recommendations. Here's what we need to do to bring that quality up to the level we want. And then, of course, you're getting stakeholder approval, usually from management or the customer. Now, here's the benefits. You monitor project management contributions to the achievement of business objectives. You identify and respond to weak or troubled project performance, and you conduct quality management activities all the way through. You also maintain professional and practice standards within the project management environment. You ensure compliance with organizational policies, industry certifications, requirements, government regulations, and contractual agreements. Now, you'll notice here the book I've quoted from, Project Management Office by Gerald Hill. He does a lot with auditing. And Hill is a great resource. And that's not a resource I gave you a moment ago, but he is a great resource for what to audit and how will that auditing benefit us. Now, the project auditing model will make a difference. You set up your project auditing capability, determine project auditing needs. What's my need? Do I need the best audit with the most extensive list of criteria? Probably not. You're probably auditing just 1 or 2 things to be able to know what's happening in the area of quality, okay? So determine your project auditing needs. You identify project auditing resources. You establish project audit performance points. Then you conduct the project audit itself. You prepare for project audits and reviews. You conduct the project audit and then prepare for the project audit report. And that audit report is going to be where you give the feedback on what the numbers show, because you're trying to quantify this as much as possible. And so you're giving the feedback on what the numbers show. Then project management audit provides a comprehensive examination of the project management performance accomplished through discussions and interviews with the project manager, technical leaders, sampling of the project team, could be the customer, it could be other people too. You're deciding who those people are. So the purpose of that is not just to limit it to that. And then it's accomplished through reviews and examination of project documents, as well as interviews and surveys. It's applicable to large and long duration projects if you need to do that. It should be performed quarterly until the project's completed. And so I say quarterly, that's a general rule. You might need to do it monthly if you've had a project in crisis, or you might need to be doing it every 6 months because your project's not moving very fast. It's best when performed by an impartial auditor. It may be performed by the project manager of the team. Impartial auditor is good, but let's say you don't have money for that. And so if you don't have money for an impartial auditor, that's okay. You don't have to. Use your internal people to do portions of that and see if you can't still get some benefit from that. All right. So let's say you've discovered some deficiency, and so you've got to recover that project or get the project back on track. Project recovery implies that there's a variation in the project performance that's significant enough to warrant special attention. It examines why routine project management practices are not producing the desired results or performance, and then you prescribe some kind of corrective action needed to return the project management oversight and control to a routine status. And so here's what you're looking at here. How do we get it back up to where we need it to be? So you're bumping it back up. So let's say, for an example, you've got a lot of tests that have been failing like crazy. Okay, so what's changed? Or has anything changed? Maybe nothing's changed. But you've got to come up with corrective actions for how to be able to get the test results back up to something that's going to be much more manageable for you. Now, the range of project recovery is kind of wide. You can have basic, where it creates a preliminary guidance for project control, manage a list of indicators of troubled projects, complies and validates general remedies used to correct project performance, specify procedures for evaluating issue projects. Now, as you start looking at it from a basic, it might not be a big deal. This is just a very short term, couple of weeks, we're just monitoring this thing. The second might be standard, might be much more in depth. It develops a capability to conduct project recovery activities. So you build a qualified project recovery team. Now, when you're building this team is setting aside so that they can work on this and do this audit, a much more in-depth audit. They specify project recovery actions, how they're going to follow through, and do they have power to make decisions on what those actions need to be, and can they evaluate the project recovery results? How are those actions working? Is it bringing us back into compliance? And then obviously the highest one would be the advanced, where it expands capability to conduct project recovery efforts. It provides project recovery training for recovery team members. It introduces project recovery management and tracking tools. And so at the advanced level, you're training a team for them to be specialists in recovery. Now, you'll see this sometimes in projects, not necessarily from a quality standpoint per se, but you'll see this where a project gets off track and you'll kind of bring in that maverick team that kind of gets the project caught back up. And then that maverick team might be taken off, and then it goes back to the regular team to finish out. And so you'll see this in other areas, for an example. Now, here's a process for recovery. You develop the recovery assessment process, plan and conduct the project recovery, analyze the data, capture the recovery lessons learned there of why we got off track in the first place and how did we do in our recovery, and then make recommendations to management. It's verified that by management, documented on what you did and why you think you got off in the first place. And the reason why you want this documented is because this is going to play a role in planning in the future to make sure these projects do not get off track in this area. And then you're developing the recovery assessment model. And so assessment process, you identify recovery indicators, assess project and identify problem areas, prepare recovery decision packages, coordinate project recovery decisions. And this is usually pretty intense because the project has missed the planning, or it's missed the quality of these pieces. And so what's happened here is that now you're trying to get it back on track in the area of quality. And so you're wanting these meetings to take place fast. You're wanting decisions to be made fast. And then plan and conduct project recovery. You establish project recovery team, develop the project recovery plan, stabilize the project using the solutions, and then concluding the project recovery. And so that doesn't mean that it just goes right back to everything, but you've probably made some adjustments in the metrics and the data that you're collecting to verify the project's doing what it should be doing. And then you're capturing the recovery lessons learned, examining the project management indicators, examining the project selection criteria, examining the project recovery process. How did we do? What could we do better? And then updating the project management remedies. So what kind of solutions did we put into place? Were those the best solutions for what we have? Okay. So we're getting tight on our time, so let's take a look at these last few things. Next, identifying recovery indicators. What might you be measuring in that recovery time? Well, scope, cost, and schedule are no-brainer because those seem to come up no matter what. So you're probably measuring those. But something else you might do is resource utilization. How are we using our people? Quality itself, the quality metrics. Are we tracking and measuring the right stuff? And then risk. Do we have risks that are happening? Those unknown events that keep coming up that keep knocking our socks off. And then you're assessing the project and identifying any problem areas. Now, 5 major areas of project performance that can be examined as part of the project recovery assessment would be assess the application of the current project management methodology. So number 1, is the methodology the right methodology? Is it working? And if it's not working, what's wrong? Secondly, assessing the current project management support structure. Is management supporting the current methodology? Assessing the current business interests and issues. Assessing the current project work plan, and assessing the current project team and key stakeholders. So let's go back to the first two, methodology. So let's say we want to do an agile or a scrum type of methodology, and we're struggling, we're having problems. And then you get to the second bullet point here, you assess the current project management support structure. Well, one piece of Scrum or Agile is that you've got a customer embedded in that team, or you've got a product owner who's embedded in that team who represents the customer. So if you don't have some of those, then automatically you don't have the support structure to run Scrum or Agile, because we're sabotaging it by not having certain people in that team. So that would be one of the outcomes that you would see by doing this type of analysis. Now, preparing the recovery decision package. Recovery action review and approval is facilitated when a standard document approach to the decision process is created. It should include project recovery activities, a statement of project condition, and project recovery recommendation. Now, notice what the output of this decision package is from the project recovery. Because we've done analysis, we've done the interviews, and we're trying to get things back on track, you've got the activities in place, you've got a statement of the project condition where it stands right now, where you had forecast it's going, and then the project recovery recommendations, what we need to do in the future that you think that you're recommending to management or the project manager or the PMO in order to keep the project going in the right direction. So part of the plan and conduct project recovery is establishing project recovery team. Notice here that we normally have people with power and authority on this. Senior management, project recovery manager who has access to all of these people, project team members. If it's a vendor and a contractor, then you've got somebody from the vendor company that has some power and authority to say yes or no. And then of course the customer. And so depending on the contract, depending on the particular project, all of this is going to be a little different. But the point is you want people who have some authority and power, or you're going to find yourself in a bottleneck, even trying to get the project back on track from a quality standpoint. Next, develop the project recovery plan. Revise project work plan, update the project risk management plan, the quality assurance plan, revise the communication plan. Why? We're communicating differently because of the problem. Our work is going to be different because we have different people and different emphasis here to get the quality up. And we want to make sure that what we're doing is not hurting the project, but making it better. Then stabilizing the project using recovery solution management, stakeholder communication management, project tracking and controlling, and then change management. Obviously, if you've not been measuring up in the area of quality, this assessment and this analysis is going to give you insight into what you need to change and do differently. And so that's the reason why you have this package of work right here, is because what's our new solution? How are we tracking it and controlling it? And also change management. We're going to be making changes in order to get these things back on track. And then the last piece, concluding the recovery, you're compiling the recovery data, project data, you're preparing project analysis and the recommendation report, you're specifying the transition activities, you're obtaining approval for the transition, conducting transition to routine operations, and you're achieving project recovery documents and materials. So here's what you're doing with recovery. Because recovery is like that temporary group or temporary plan to get the project back up in quality, once you get it back up there, this whole slide here that we're dealing with is how to be able to transition that back off to the regular project team to maintain that quality now that it's over with. And so now that quality crisis is over with. So when it's talking about transition here, it's not transition of the end of the project, it's transition of the recovery team back over to the normal team so they can now run this in the future from this point forward. And then the last piece is that lessons learned. Did all key project recovery team members have access to and use the prescribed project recovery methods? Was the process comprehensive enough to provide sufficient guidance to enable users to initiate and conduct the project recovery effort? And does the process provide adequate guidance for obtaining technical and business support during project recovery? This lessons learned is not a lessons learned for the project, but for the time that you had the recovery team. So the recovery team work that is happening on this project is like is like a mini project within a project. And so that team is now doing the lessons learned on the work they did to get that quality back up to standard. All right, now let me come to the conclusion here as we've run out of time and kind of pull this thing together for you. So let me talk a little bit about next month. Next month on May 12th, we will be, our webinar will be Making Project Change Control Work. And so we'll be talking about changes and change control. So we're going to be talking about waterfall. It's what we're going to be doing. It's going to be a traditional or waterfall project. And we're going to talk about how change control should be working. And of course, this is the formality that's there. If you're running Agile or Scrum, then obviously change control is going to be a little different, quite a bit different actually. But that's what we're going to be doing for next month. Now, let me stop for just a second. Let me open up and let you type in as if you have some questions. And let me even open up the microphones here. So we've got a lot of people on here. And so let me open up your microphones. And give you a chance to ask some questions if you have. I thought I could just punch one button, but actually I'm going to punch 100. Okay, there we go. All right, I've unmuted everybody. So if you're not going to ask a question,
hi, this is Maddie. I just missed
turn your microphone off. But
1 second.
And Jenny, honestly, I know you can muscle around and do stuff, okay? But the question is, should you?
Thing that I
right,
just
there's nothing that's muscle around that's going to bother.
All right, so turn your microphone off, and then if you want to ask a question.
But before we take the disc off, I don't know if you wanted to walk out there or drive out there and look and see what the hell needs to be done or not.
All right, somebody have a question? Question?
No question, but it was a good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any questions from anybody? All right, you'll get your video probably later today or in the morning, and so you'll be able to have that. Any questions about the material that I recommended to you, about the evaluation, the auditing books?
Was the one you recommended above all others?
Probably these two, Kersner's and Rad's are the two that I would probably recommend the most. It was so practical. And so you can get either one of them on Amazon, but it was so practical.
Thank you.
kind of lifted up the weight, and then I got out there a couple weeks later and just started chopping away at it. So I do, and I was going to call them because.
Somebody else have a question? All right, guys, thank you all so much for being part of this. And so stay healthy. And so hopefully we'll all be back to work in a few weeks. But anyway, stay healthy and enjoy your time at home. Bye, guys. Have a good day.